Hello, beautiful people, and
Good
welcome to,
afternoon.
oh my goodness, and welcome to another installment of Coffee Chats. You guys are probably familiar with our names and faces at this point, but my name's Kyra Dawkins.
And I'm Mackenzie Finklea.
And again, we're so excited to have you all join us today. Um, it's funny because Valentine's Day was earlier this week, and I feel like it's funny because in a writing group that I have the privilege of being in, and Mackenzie's a part of that community as well. We were talking a little bit about how romance and relationships and informs and shapes our writing, and
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, I guess it kind of connects to our coffee chat topic for today, because in order to understand the role that relationships might play inside of writing, you also have to have a good understanding of your relationship with yourself.
That was smooth as hell.
Mhm. Mhm.
That was
Arguably,
great.
that's thank you. Arguably, it's probably the most important relationship inside of the creative process, because oftentimes people make the assumption that um, writing is like this solitary act, and that is true sometimes at certain points of the process. But
Right,
around here, we like to say, "Never write alone," right?
right. Writing as a whole, finishing a novel, finishing a project, none of that happens alone. But a lot of it does take a lot of inward looking and learning about yourself and your habits and how you work well, which is some of the things that we're going to touch on today with our two special guests. So without further ado,
Woo!
we're going to bring them on and introduce them to you guys.
Yes, dramatic drum roll. Hi. So, thank you so much for joining us today. It's so wonderful because I know that both of you have written books that at least pertain to somewhat to self exploration within different contexts. So, in terms of introduction, Samala, would you like to go first?
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Samala, and I have just authored and published my first book, Spiral, which is a creative memoir. I know I received the books, the physical books, yesterday, my author's
Oh,
copies. I
good
know.
day.
I know. It was like, yeah, I wasn't expecting to feel the way that I did. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel. It was just a very kind of like, I did it. It actually, so my book is a creative memoir about my journey of healing from complex trauma. So absolutely self knowledge and self understanding, and actually really truly excavating who I am and thought I was a huge part of the story, but also then the writing process in and of itself was deeply explorative as well.
Thank you for sharing.
No problem.
What about you, Dr. Passeri? Is that how we pronounce your last name?
Passeri, yeah, but
Passeri, I was close.
Luciana is preferred. Thank you. Yeah. So, thank you both for having me, Mackenzie and Kyra. I really appreciate it too, and it's so great to hear you too, Samala. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your story. So, my memoir is called "Gods in a Box on My Dresser: An Inquiry into the Human Capacity to Thrive." And Kyra, when you were saying about books about healing and trauma. Oh my heavens, 911. This has been quite the journey to share this story. So my story is really about how I traversed my relationship with God and religion as I navigated childhood complex traumas as well, abandonment, sexual abuse, and then ultimately found healing on a little island in the middle of the Peruvian Amazon.
I mean, I'm excited to dive right in. And I think this really leads well into our first question because you both have written such vulnerable works. And so that takes a lot of courage to put all that out there. It takes a lot of courage to put out a book in general, but especially with both of the topics that you guys have addressed. So we are dying to know, when was the moment that you knew you wanted to write a book and you felt ready to share these stories? And whichever one of you wants to jump in first.
Shall I go? I was like, who's going to press the button? Yeah, I mean, I think, again, just like hearing you describe your book, Luciana, I was like, oh, I want to read that. Because each story is so unique, right? Everyone's story of healing and recovery is just, completely individual. So it's just beautiful. For me, it was, the moment came, it was like a very sort of, it didn't really make any sense. I was out on a walk, and yeah, does it ever? I was out on a walk, and I just had this sort of, my inner voice, as I kind of describe it, just said, create a Word document called Spiral. So my book is called Spiral, and that was it. That was kind of the first little seed. And then it just kind of went from there of like, it's time to share my story. It's time to write this down. And it just kind of was like a series of really small, kind of like breadcrumb moments. And the more I trusted in those moments, because at the time I was on my own healing journey, 2020 was the kind of the catalyst for that. I was more and more like, oh yeah, I trust myself. So I'm going to see where this goes. And then it was then in 2021, late 2021, that I basically was then linked up with the book creators and New Degrees Press. And then that's basically how it all unfolded. But the first moment was, it wasn't even like, I didn't even know that I wanted to write a book necessarily. It was like, I know that something's going to happen, and I think it's going to be that, but I don't know, but I'm going to trust it anyway. And then it was just like a series of things. And then when I kind of realized that, hey, I could actually write a book, it was like, okay, like full steam ahead.
Well, awesome. I guess we're just gonna dive right in. Thank you for that. That's cool. I have in my notes, walks are like the best always, right? I do my best. Holy cow. Walks, hiking, whatever, anything outside. So I hear you there. My journey, actually, for years, I have thought, I got to write a book. But mostly it came not from my compulsion to like need to write a book. So many people, as different bits of my story, I would feel vulnerable enough to share. People would say to me, I can't wait to read your book. And I'm like, yeah, maybe someday. Sure. Right. But it never really struck me like I could do it. I have, no joke, over 20 journals, right? So that was my book. And I think a lot of people might be able to relate to that. It's like, oh, I'm keeping great notes. I'm going to write a book. I'm writing in a journal, la, 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 la. Next journal. And I had no idea how to pull it together until one day, this lovely woman, Paula, came into a restaurant that I was in Cancun, Mexico. And she's like, oh, I'm writing a book. And have you ever heard of New Degree Press and, this Book Creators Institute? And so it was at that moment that I actually knew all my journals could manifest as a real published book. So really a cool journey, and just, letting go of the how and waiting until the universe brought it to me. So I'm grateful. Yeah.
I relate to that big time, because a lot of people will think if they decide they want to write a book, it can feel like a very daunting task to feel like you have to start completely from scratch. But more often than not, if you have the impulse to write a book, chances are you've already written a lot of it, and you just have to go and find it in other places, either in your journals or in your academic work, or, it appears in a number of places for people.
Mm-hmm. And something that I noticed in both of your answers, there kind of was this following of curiosity. There was sort of this, oh wait, like with Samala, you mentioned like listening to your inner voice to just sort of put things onto a Word document without really knowing why. And then in your case, Luciana, you were talking about how you had these journals and then you had an encounter with somebody who had access to manifesting your journals into this new form. So I guess in an interesting way, both of your journeys sort of like invited intuition to like leading you into the creative process. So like, as it maybe intuition played a role in starting the process, but how would you both say intuition and or spiritual wellness, whatever that could mean, how would that inform or how does that inform your creative process at large, especially during the book writing process?
Ooh, I can start with that one. Holy cow. So first off, for me, for me, everything's relational, and I'm a designer by trade. And most importantly, it was me being centered and understanding that I had a capacity to bring this product into the world, not knowing how I would do it, but that I had the capacity to do it. And it came with me understanding the power of my thoughts, my emotions, my talk, and my behaviors. And so as a designer, quick analogy here, I started a company called Passeri. It's a slow fashion company, pretty great. But anyway, it's in Peru. And one day I was walking in Peru, and I'm walking, and I kept saying to myself, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea how to start a business. By the way, I'm an educator, a teacher, no idea about shoes. This idea came to me when I came out of the jungle. So it's actually very much related to my book. So anyway, so I'm walking down the street in Cusco, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. And one day I just stopped and I clocked it. And I said, that's right. You have no idea what you're doing, but you'll figure it out. So for me, that was so transferable to every other area in my life. But the spiritual wellness and my intuition was all importantly tangled in my thoughts, in knowing I could do this. Even though I didn't know what I was doing. And so like building my shoe business, I had no idea what I was doing when I started to write this book. Zero ideas. So staying really spiritually centered and grounded and trusting that I didn't need to know everything when I started, but that I would be able to figure it out was absolutely key for me.
And what about you, Samala?
I just love that story. And again, I think, when we kind of start talking in the realms of intuition, I think that, for all of us, it's a similar thing. It's that kind of sense of like, it doesn't quite make sense, but I'm going to let go of the how, and I'm just going to kind of place one foot in front of the other. I suppose my experience of my journey is slightly different in that mine was more of an exploration into energetics. And I don't know if anyone here has heard of human design. Maybe some of the watchers have. But 2020 coincided with me coming to understand my human design, so my energetic blueprint, and kind of what that means in terms of how I create. And I say that how as in how my energy is designed to interact with other energy. And when I started to play with that, and then when I had that urge come through for the book, I knew what that was. And I was like, oh, this is the creative urge. It doesn't make sense. And I'm just going to do what my intuition says and let go of the head talk and let go of the, well, this doesn't make sense. And you don't know how to write a book. And similar, I'm meant to be a women's health coach, and I'm meant to be doing this, like not writing a book. And, this doesn't make any sense. So for me, it was a case of like that similar thing of like, okay, I'm just gonna go with this process. I'm just gonna kind of really lean into what it actually feels like is actually truly me, as opposed to what I should be doing. And then again, that similar thing happened. I think when you kind of put it out there and say, right, I'm gonna do this thing that it doesn't make sense, but it does make sense because actually when I think about it, I've kind of always been doing it. There are journals, there's poetry, I've been writing blogs, I write content, I've been doing it, but in a way that made sense. And then when I released that how, the universe, whatever you want to call it, conspired to make the how make sense. So I had a conversation and met someone who directed me toward the book creators. And, you know, obviously then New Degrees Press, and then you work with people who they show you the how. So it's like, you know, and actually interestingly, I'd written, by the time I got to that point, you know, I'd written so much, but actually I got to, when I started the program, none of what I'd written went into this manuscript, because actually it was like, it was almost like, oh, like, I don't need that either. You know, it was just, the whole process was just unbelievable. But yeah, so for me, you know, this book is very spiritual. It is about my spiritual awakening. It is about my psychological awakening, my healing, and the wisdom within all of the trauma. But at the same time, whilst I was writing that, I was deepening the trust in myself and in my ability to trust in my creative edges as well. So the book in and of itself was a very healing spiritual process, and creative, all of the things.
All of the things.
Yes,
and it is very easy to get caught up in the how. And that's one thing that can keep us from even starting. And you said something very interesting, is that, you know, someone was able to kind of show you the how. There's kind of there's these two hurdles. We have these mental ones where, like you mentioned, Luciana, where, yeah, you don't know how, but you're gonna figure it out. So there's that trust in your gut, that personal intuition. And then also, never write alone, right? Going and getting information from other people who have experience, having conversations like this. All of that is a huge piece of the puzzle as well. So the big question is, why is it important for authors to pursue that, to pursue community or external accountability in the creative process? It is a big question.
Okay. I was like, oh, I thought we were like going in order. Yeah, I mean, I think that I know that there are authors obviously that do write and publish books on their own. But for me, I mean, it was everything. That class that we, you know, the sessions that we had early on with the book creators, like coming together every Wednesday, for me that was just beautiful. I felt so nurtured, and I felt so held in my complete, like, oh, whoa, what am I actually doing here? Like, I'm not a writer. You know, those moments. And then working with, you know, my developmental editor, I think that for me just gave me the external accountability, because, you know, I pretty quickly discovered that I am definitely not a plotter. You know, I was sort of like all over the place with my writing. But having her to kind of keep me accountable and to come to those weekly classes was just, yeah, it kind of kept me feeling like, okay, like I'm moving, it's moving, I'm moving. I'm not just randomly writing, you know, which is what I had been doing. You know, I was just kind of like every 3 days, like, oh, I'll just write like 500 words of like random stuff. It was more focused, it was more centered, it was more directed. So I was able to direct. So I was still listening to my intuition in terms of how I wanted this book to feel, how I wanted to write it. Like, you know, there was a few occasions where there was a bit of like, oh, that's not really like how you write a book. And I was like, well, this is really what I want to do. So, you know, can we, you know, let's like, trust me, like, you know. But it was like, she was like, you know, there was that direction of like, let's direct this, you know, which I think was really important for me to kind of channel that. But absolutely, I think having community, you know, being able to be in group with other writers, just to know that you're not like, A, that you're not alone, but B, that all the things that you're experiencing, like you're not the only one feeling it, and that it's completely normal to have like those blocks and those moments of like, this is just horrible, I want to just throw this all away, like no one's ever going to read it, like, you know, all of that stuff. So yeah, no, I feel like having a community and you know, like anyone that I know now that's writing a book or has written something, I'm like, you need to go here, you know, because the support is, and just the community, you know, everything the whole way through, like not just the first bit, but you know, the whole thing is just, yeah, absolutely amazing and so important, I think. So yeah.
So I love that, Small. I love how you emphasize just remembering that you're not alone, because that was really important for me too. I really think everything in life is relational. Everything is relational. Healing's relational, success, failures, joy, redemption, suffering, personal and professional success. It's always relational. And so when I think of the writing process, I think it's just so natural that we do that in relationship with other people. And not just, I think, like as a community of people, like with the Book Creators Institute, which was a beautiful game changer for me. I'm so grateful for that. But in addition to that community, for me, I really had to step into my power and be vulnerable and say, hey, I need to open myself up to friends and colleagues and let other people know that I'm writing this book and not sit in isolation, which for me was terrifying, actually. Similar to what Samala was saying. I mean, I thought, who's going to care, right? Who's going to care that I'm writing this book? Yeah, it's my story. People are busy. And so one of the most important relational things that I learned in writing this book is me being willing to invite other people into the writing process and build this author community, for which I am eternally grateful for. I am so grateful for all of the people who supported me in this process. And one of the outcomes that was really unexpected, I guess I cognitively knew this would happen, but it was really unexpected. And that was when I was willing to be vulnerable and share this story about my journey with God and religion and my own suffering and redemption and addiction and blah, 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 blah. It opened other people's opportunity to share their stories. And that was so cool. And it was such a gift for me to sit in relationship with other people and for us to hold space for each other, for not just each other, but for small groups to share their own stories. And I'm so grateful for that. So for me, it's both, right? The writers community that Book Creators offers, and then the power of an author community behind us, like breathing life into our work. Mm-hmm.
Well, both of you, that was just beautifully said. And I think that really presses into, speaking of community, we're going to open it up to questions from our audience today, and quite a few of them have been asking questions already about how you've gone about the writing process and how you've started to cultivate community for your own around the topics of your book, which you two have already begun to touch on. But I do have a quick follow-up question myself. Because earlier on, especially as you were both talking about following your initial intuition, for some reason, in like my strange, like, I guess, nostalgic brain, some of the language you were using reminded me of this framework that the now retired dean of my college referred to as the beginner's mind. I know it's been around for a while, but he used to talk about it all the time. Just being open to not expecting yourself to be an expert in something before you dive into a process, and just sort of allowing for the light to illuminate the step in front of you, but not necessarily the entire way. And I guess my question would be, is it helpful to think of creativity or following intuition within frameworks, like in the more abstract sense, like beginner's mind, or like following sort of like the discourse around those things? Or do you feel that that kind of process is intensely individual and it isn't as helpful to abstract it, if that question makes sense?
It does. I can give, so that's a great question. Now, Gods in a Box on My Dresser, my personal memoir, is about actually dismantling definitions and predetermined like frameworks. So for me, 100% is being open and curious and allowing spirit, allowing my intuition to go wherever it wants. And I found that anytime I would try to put a framework or a title around something, it would actually interfere with my ability to be creative. And it would cause me more anxiety, like, am I doing this right? How's it going? And I really, it was in one of the book creator sessions, one of the most important slides that I saw of the thousands of slides and documents was the slide on convergence and divergence. So it's going to sound contrary to what I just said, but it helped me so much. And I've told so many authors about this. And the idea is when we write is to write all the dots, right? Write all the little stories and don't worry how they're going to come together. And so the writing of the stories may seem like, oh, I'm writing this story, so it's a defined, prescribed thing. But knowing how it's all going to come together for me is that part of the convergence. So write the dots. Don't worry how the dots are going to come together. That will come later. And that's the creative energy. And that's the intuition and just trusting that we're not writing islands here. They're going to connect. And that which doesn't connect, get rid of it, man. I got rid of thousands and thousands of words that I thought were great. Who cares? Who cares? They're great words that are now in a graveyard somewhere. Yeah. So I'm just really excited about how important being curious and creative is, and not being confining. Yeah. And not being redundant. Check. Sorry.
I just love that answer. An amazing question. And I think that, again, for me, I think creativity is very individual for sure. And I think, and then intuition is also very individual. So something that, again, I've come to understand about like myself is that I'm not a gut feeling person. It's a very quiet, intuitive sense. So it's a very, so again, it's like understanding that about myself. And then I think in terms of creativity, I work well when I have a loose framework. So again, having that like, okay, Samala, you're going to write 3 stories this week. They don't have to be in order. Write whatever you want. And then it wasn't until I got to the very end. So, I had a loose structure for the book in terms of like, this is the order of the chapters, or this is the order of the stories. And I think that's what I did in my head. They're just stories. And then I'm just going to put these stories together. Somehow they're going to come together, but I'm just going to put them together. And then it wasn't until the revision phase when the next kind of like, oh, this is how it goes together, that it all came together. And like Luciana said, like the amount of stuff that I cut and got rid of words. And I think, in the beginning I was like, oh my gosh, it has to be this many words. And, I remember my editor saying, it doesn't matter how many words it is. Like, it doesn't matter. This is how the story will be the exact amount of words that it's meant to be. So I think, yeah, like writing in those dots was amazing, and just being like, right, I'm just going to write in stories and it's just going to be all over the place. And I literally had all these Post-it notes all over my wall, and then, kind of put them into some kind of chronological order. But yeah, the actual kind of the format of my book didn't come together until like 6 weeks before copy editing. And that was purely like it makes sense now, I understand. And that came through intuition, and it came through creativity. And then it came through a discussion with my editor as well. Like, kind of like, do you think this, how can we make this work? Like, do you think this could work? Like, but yeah, I think that for me, a loose framework, then I can get creative. I wouldn't be able to go in to do something with no structure at all. I wouldn't know where to start. I'd be like, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to start. But if someone just says, oh, within this framework, do X, Y, and Z, then I can get messy. Then I can kind of get loose, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. And yeah, that's completely relatable to me as well, because I also do not write linearly at all. But it is important to have like outlines and structure. And yes. So in the same vein as methodology, we do have a couple of questions that we have time for in the chat over here. One of them, Mage wants to know, what are the best methods? So this is more of probably a in your opinion question. To move words that we know the meaning of into words that we can actually use in writing. This is super relatable because you read a word and you think, oh, yes, I know what that word means. But then when it comes to writing, it's like, where'd my vocabulary go? Out the window. So in your opinion, how do we migrate that knowledge?
That's a great question, I think, because writing is so individual and style is so individual. And of course, words reflect style, right? I come from a very academic background. And so for me, it was trying to find words that weren't academic. And so the way that I could answer this question, I think best, is to not worry so much about particular words and worry more, not worry, don't worry at all, but think more about showing and what words can I use that will best show my story versus tell my story. Because quite frankly, in my experience, I could write a paragraph of showing, say, one of my plant medicine experiences in the jungle. And when I focused instead what words show versus tell, it was always a better result.
That and a thesaurus is a good friend during the editing process, not necessarily during the writing, because they can get distracting, but it is a good friend during the editing process.
Oh, and may I just one more thing, and using AI can help to unlock a creative what's it called? A creative box, I guess. It can unlock your world. And Jasper is a really good AI tool. I wouldn't like cut and paste from it per se, but it can really help you get a different way to think about the words that you're using. Mm-hmm.
Technology.
It's interesting actually, because this is something actually I didn't really think about at all. I think because my style is quite creative and free flow, I actually had to do a lot of work on reining in my kind of conscious sort of stream of writing. But what I found useful for when I say was using repeat words, and again, this doesn't really happen till the revision phase, and I think that's it, isn't it? It's like, I think I did initially, like when I first started writing scenes and chapters, I was really hung up on words and making everything, sound really beautiful. But then that piece about, show versus tell was like a huge game changer. It's such a game changer. But I think just, not worrying about words and your voice. And I think your natural voice, like your voice will come through, and maybe that is using certain types of words, like, I don't know. I think sometimes it's like, whatever your voice is, you want that to come through anyway, don't you, with your writing, depending on what you're writing. But yeah, so I think for me, I didn't really worry so much about words, as in, when I realized it didn't matter, I just had to get a first draft in. It didn't actually matter about the quality so much at that point. And then the really getting specific about words. And that was when the thesaurus and, having loads of little tabs on my laptop.
Yep.
Thesaurus, dictionary, like all of the things. But I think, like it's amazing how your writing versus your reading vocabulary can be so different. But I think what Luciana said about just the show versus tell, and that in itself opens up so much when you're showing versus telling, I think as well. You'll write very differently.
Beautifully said, both of you. I think that there really is, because it's kind of like this strange, like, you're right, it could be really weird to not even be aware of the process until you actually have to analyze your initial impulse for the words that you use.
Mhm.
I think that that is something that it is intrinsic to the editing process. And for
Yeah.
me, it's often helpful to build off of what Luciana was saying, and Samala also touched on this too, is sort of like in the act of showing, I'm kind of imagining my ideal reader. And to be honest, the ideal reader is me. So it's like, how would I want somebody else to share this with me? I guess
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be condescended to. I wouldn't want to like be overly abstract. Like I don't like not to just showboat the knowledge I have. It's like striking
Right.
that balance of like, how do you make somebody feel like they're with you in the book? And that artistry, that voice cultivation happens in the editing phase. And you're right, at the first draft, you just got to bust it out. It's messy, but as long as it's there, you know?
Yes, get it out of the brain.
So, in terms of a couple of other questions, we're just going to consolidate them into one because these are like fun questions, sort of kind of focusing on some potential inspiration for you inside of your book process or just things you enjoy with your creative minds in general. So we got two questions from Samuel. One is, who's your favorite author? And another is, what's your favorite novel? It doesn't necessarily have to be a novel. It could probably also be a memoir, but like favorite book, favorite author. This question is hard, admittedly.
It's like asking what's your favorite song. I'm like, it depends on the day.
Well, I have lots because I have these different genres, right? Like I love plant books, like The Secret Life of Plants. I love Persig's book, the classic Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. For me, it's not so much about a favorite author. It's about authors who inspire me. So even Robert Greene, these are very different, Robert Greene, Persig, very different. Robert Greene wrote, books like Mastery or Malcolm Gladwell, Blink, or Outliers. So for me, I kind of wish I had one favorite author. If you're talking about when I was young, I'm going to go with Nancy Drew books. And all I know is they're Nancy Drew. Read all of them, had them all. I don't even remember the author though. Do you, Kyra? Do you remember who the author is of? No.
Oh,
well,
that's embarrassing. Let me look it up.
It's Carolyn Keene.
Thank you.
Nice.
Very nice.
Thank you.
But you know what's kind of cool about me even just saying that is look at how important that character development was, right? Like I don't remember the author. And if I think about my own book, quick side, I would really rather people not remember my name in like 30 or 40 years, but remember the life stories and the lessons and how it moved people. So sorry, I can't answer your question exactly about having a favorite author, but I have lots, and it's just people who've inspired me. And there's been so many, and I'm so grateful for that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a hard question. I think for me, again, as a child, like the book that, the first book I read fully by myself was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I must have been 8, I think. My teacher gave it to me, teacher in class. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and that was, that for me was like, it just, I remember just being like, oh my goodness, I'm in, because prior to that, I'd, just been reading. I mean, I'd read an encyclopedia. Like that's kind of the kid I was like the kind of kid that would read whatever was in the house, I would read. So I definitely went down the road of, so it's my son, science fiction and fantasy, as a like a young adult, and then into teen, like teen fiction, Harry Potter, obviously I grew up with Harry Potter, and then, all of that kind of stuff. But then I got sort of more into, I I suppose, more classic literature then as well. But I love reading. I love fiction. I love nonfiction. And again, I think often I won't necessarily remember the author, but I remember the book. However, in terms of, I think, authors who have hugely inspired me, and especially in terms of my own journey, it has been when I have read, memoirs and, biographies, and especially other, women, because obviously it's relatable. So, so I think, Eat, Pray, Love was kind of the book that kind of, I was like, okay, she can do it. I can do it.
Yes.
And I love Liz Gilbert. I love her. I think she's wonderful. So, but yeah, and I can't remember what the other question was.
Oh, who's your favorite author? Who's your favorite novel? You were
right. Yeah.
It's interesting because for me, like, who's my favorite author or my favorite novel, my answer to those questions are different from the places where I find inspiration or who I aspire to be like, or how I aspire to write. Not all that different. Personally, for me, one of my favorite novels, my go-to answer is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, because I remember the first time reading that when I was in high school and just being so captivated by the storytelling, even though the whole story was pretty tragic. Like, it was one of those things that you just couldn't put down, and you still were left feeling very hopeful at the end, because it's essentially a memoir. You know that the life turns out fine, and the author has a great life, and goes on and moves on from all of these things, overcoming obstacles and all that. One of my favorite authors, though, especially reading a lot of them as a teen, was Wendy Mass. And especially A Mango-Shaped Space. I just or Heaven Looks a Lot Like a Mall. Both of those are really great books. And I read things that are quite different from that now, but I like how what's all relatable here is our favorites are rooted in things when we first started reading and coming from our childhood, which I think is really special. And I would love to hear Kyra's thoughts on this as well.
I concur with all aforementioned statements. I think that it's weird. When I was younger, I was drawn to two main genres. First of all, Samala, when you mentioned The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the way I am obsessed with C.S. Lewis's work, Mackenzie knows that it's kind of insane. But generally, I was drawn to two kind of realms. I was drawn to the speculative realm of science fiction fantasy. And then I was also drawn to the Babysitters Club, everyday, everyday teenagers doing everyday things. And I'm like, teenagers are so weird. I can't believe I'm going to be one day. And then as I got older, I still find that I read a lot of speculative fiction in particular for fun. And that happens to be what I write now. I also really appreciate authors that take children's imagination seriously. So C.S. Lewis, Madeline L'Engle, J.R. Tolkien to an extent.
I was going to say A Wrinkle in Time, yeah.
Yes. So I just really, that's something I just want for, my work, and I aspire to be like them, that whatever age demographic I'm writing towards, I want for them to feel like they're being listened to, and that I think another aspect too is, as I also got older, I found that I wanted to lean into narrative explorations of nonfiction topics that I found interesting. So I've done a lot of the books I read randomly on the side is the history of colors. I love Siddhartha Mukherjee, who does a lot of work around narrative medicine. He wrote The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a biography of cancer. I read a lot of plant medicine books, even though I don't practice plant medicine, but I read a lot about fungi, and I read a lot about the botany in general. So I just read it for fun, just to know about it, and neuroscience too. So yeah, I guess reading has become a way to understand the entire world through story as I've gotten older.
This has been such a fun chat, ladies. And before we close things out, as we are running low on time here, but important for our audience members, always, any final parting words of wisdom? There have been a lot of great wisdom nuggets today already, But if nothing else, what do you want audience members to remember?
Okay. It's like a staring competition. Well, I suppose in keeping with the theme of intuition, I think that, creativity comes down to trusting in your voice and your unique expression. So, I think for me, it was where might I dilute myself, for other people, for fear of rejection or looking for praise or looking for whatever. So I think it's, the thing that I learned about myself was that, I had my own way of expressing myself, and it was, just kind of staying really anchored in that, staying grounded and staying anchored in who I am. This is my voice. This is how I want to express myself. And just trusting that is more than enough. So that would probably be my little bit.
So yeah, trust self. I love that. Thank you for that, Samala. Absolutely. I think for me, it's really two main things. One, get out into nature, walk, get out into nature, walk. My inspiration, 1000% comes from being in nature, hiking, walking in mountains, walking on a city street, wherever it is, just getting out and being in nature. Huge game changer for the creative process for me. And the second thing is set and setting. I always, my process, right? My process, I always have a candle where I'm writing. I often have a diffuser with some scent that I'm inspired to. Often it's a calming one, but sometimes I need the energizing ones. And I always keep my space really beautiful. I mean, my desk can be a disaster. My room behind me can be a disaster. Don't prefer it, but it can be. But my actual writing space, I'm really, really careful to keep it clutter-free and really beautiful. And for me, that coupled with getting out and walking really prevented me from ever. I mean, I honestly never had a writer's block. I never had oh no, I'm stuck kind of moment. And I give that credit to my space being free of clutter, head and physical space. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both so much. Like, something about this session in particular has like really resonated with me. And we just want to say thank you so much for your time. And just know that you are welcome back to Coffee Chats whenever you would like to come back. We would love to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us. And I appreciate the space. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. There's something special about creating communal spaces. And we look forward to see you guys again soon.
Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, beautiful people. What a session. I just learned
wonderful.
So much. Like, I mean, I had a feeling this was going to be a very special session. I mean, it's literally about knowing yourself and acknowledging the relational components of the creative process. So there's a
trusting
vulnerability
yourself
there.
too. Mm-hmm. Something Kyra and I were talking about. We had a writing session earlier this week, and we were both like, we've got these little demons sitting behind us. Like, what if this story's not good enough? What if the story's not exciting enough? Like all of these, like, it's like, shh, just let me write. Just get it out, right?
Behind me. Just bust it out. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, if you want to see a particular topic discussed or a particular person join our wonderful space here, do not hesitate to drop those suggestions inside of the comments below. We do read them. We do take those suggestions. So we would really appreciate it. And if you would like to get into contact with us, you could follow us on Instagram. For me, at Kyra Ann Wright. And it's a ticker below. So
yes, and for me, author M. Finklea, since we're announcing, our handles.
Yes, in fact, we are in fact announcing. So, well, beautiful people, thank you so much for everything. Onward and upward, stay safe, have a warm beverage if you would like, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.